Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Nielsen. I'm the University Director at EcoEngineers. I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar today, Revolutionizing Carbon Removal, the Power of Digital Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification Systems. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. We will not be showing very many slides today, but additional information will be available in the bottom navigation, including an ability to download our PDF of our slides today. You are able to ask questions anytime during the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. We should have about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of the presentation. We've also included some helpful attachments if you click the paperclip icon on the bottom of your screen, and you can read about our presenters today in the speaker bio tab as well. As always, don't forget to fill out our survey at the end. It lets us know how we're doing, and if you have any ideas for webinars in the future, we'd be happy to take them. So today we're actually doing a webinar with a couple of our clients and colleagues here today. We'll be hearing from two of our voluntary carbon markets colleagues, Stephen Lemishow and David LaGreca, and then Ryan Waddington from Cowboy Clean Fuels and Mingyi Bian from Mangrove Systems. So I'm going to play a short video and then I will hand it off to Steve.
Welcome, everyone. We are here today to talk about monitoring, reporting, and verification, or MRV, as many people in the carbon industry know it. I am Stephen Lemishow. I'm the Director of Strategic Development for Carbon Markets at EcoEngineers, and I am joined today by an esteemed panel of colleagues: Ryan Waddington, CEO from Cowboy Clean Fuels; David LaGreca, Managing Director of Carbon Markets at EcoEngineers; and Mingyi Bian, for Implementation Lead at Mangrove Systems. I think the main question here is, what does MRV actually mean? What are the best practices for doing it well? And as you may have noticed, we've also appended a D in front of this fun acronym, D for digital, right? So I think that begs the question, what is the future of MRV? So we are excited to dig in with our group. We're going to try and keep things really, sort of low-key, conversational today. We'll get some gotcha questions, some debate. And with that, I want to hand it over to our panelists to actually introduce themselves and their company. So Ryan, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Mingyi, and finally David after that.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, Ryan Waddington, co-founder, CEO of Cowboy Clean Fuels. We're a novel company that produces carbon dioxide removal credits and also renewable natural gas at the same time. Talk more about that in a bit, but we're Denver based. We have a project up in Wyoming, and really excited to be moving forward commercially this year, and excited about sharing what we're doing today.
All right, so I'm very honored to be here today. My name is Mingyi, and I lead product implementation at Mangrove Systems. My role really is to onboard our customers to our platform and ensure that we can deliver all the MRV needs in one place. And my background is in strategy consulting. So in the first decade of my career, I worked as an advisor to large companies on their sustainability and growth strategy across North America and Asia Pacific. And so this shift from kind of having seen the visions of energy transition and decarbonization in the boardroom, this shift going from a strategist to operator has been extremely refreshing and energizing. So it's been an honor to support product developers to make this energy transition a reality. So excited to share what we've learned from implementing this first of a kind project.
Great, I'm David LaGreca. I'm the Managing Director for Carbon Market Work at EcoEngineers. I work closely with Steve, and I've been fortunate enough to work with Mingyi and Ryan on this innovative new project. My role is largely in strategic direction for our carbon markets group. We've crafted about a dozen of cutting-edge CDR methodologies and other types of approaches out there to push along the carbon markets into a new direction. We're fortunate enough to get signed up with Ryan and be able to partner with Mangrove in this pursuit as well. I'm standing in partially for Valentina Slavinska, who did much of the heavy lift on the methodology work for our team, and am happy to participate today. Thanks.
Great, thanks guys. So I want to start just with some table setting and maybe an appetizer before we get into the main courses and the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So first, what is MRV and why is it important for project developers? MRV is not just a compliance step. I think that's important to note. It actually ensures credibility, accuracy, and ultimately market acceptance. So for project developers, it's going to impact timelines, it's going to impact costs, investor confidence. Good MRV planning from day one is going to help reduce friction later on. So in practice, MRV is deeply integrated into project design, data systems, partner selection, and risk management, and often shapes the entire operational flow. So how you collect data in the field, and then all the way through to investor or potential off-taker discussions, MRV is going to be key. So first, the M in MRV, monitoring. This is the ongoing process of tracking all data relevant to the project's emissions reductions or carbon removals. So for example, in a biochar project, you'd want to monitor things like biomass inputs, pyrolysis operations data, carbon content, application rates on agricultural fields. The goal is to gather accurate, consistent, and traceable data over time. So R, reporting. As you're monitoring accurate, consistent, and traceable data, it often needs to be packaged into a structured report following specific formats set by carbon registries like Verra, Gold Standard, or Isometric, or possibly groups like the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, or possibly even the European Union or other compliance-related agencies. The report document is going to let you know kind of what's been done, what's been measured, and how it's been measured. It includes things like calculations and estimates for the amount of CO2 reduced or removed. Think of it as the official narrative and evidence for your project's climate impact. Okay, so V for verification. This is where a third-party auditor, often known as a validation verification body, aka VVB, steps in. Their job is to independently audit the project's documents and data and to ensure that data is accurate. The design and methods align with the approved methodology, and they ensure that no double counting, inconsistencies, or errors exist. And only after verification can the registry issue credits. And before I move on, David, I want to kick to you. So there's two V's here. There's validation and verification. Can you help us distinguish between the two?
Yeah, certainly. So validation is going to be the initial step in the process for confirming that the project itself aligns with the makeup as required by the methodology and by the standard that you're following. So it's going to be the preliminary check of additionality and the project design itself to make sure that it is actually conforming and that the perceived and anticipated removals are likely to occur based off of the design specifics in the documentation. Verification is going to be the project confirmation that the removals or the activity as it was planned actually did occur. So there's quantification. There's also proof that the design of the document was carried through to the project and that there were no deviations along the way, or that those were properly called out.
Thanks, David. I also want to point out that this is an evolving field, and I think even more so recently, things are changing really quickly. So, it may be that in the past, physical samples were required to collect in the field. Today, digital monitoring tools are being developed, and where manual data collection might have been required in the past, now we have new technologies, including AI, that are making some of these processes easier. And so again, that's really where that D steps in the digital component. Things are really quickly changing, and I think we want to stay at the frontier of this space and make sure that we've got our heads wrapped around it, and that'll be a big part of our discussion today. So as I mentioned, we really do have some of the key experts in the MRV space with us today. Everyone here has been paying very close attention to MRV, the right way to do it, the stage to ensure that it's being done at the right time. And one of, I think, the best examples of this is Cowboy Clean Fuels. And so I am excited to hand it over to Ryan, who's uniquely qualified to talk about this subject, given both the impact of their project and the complexity of what they do. So with that, Ryan, let me hand it over to you to talk more about your project.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'll go into a little bit more about what we do and why it's so critical, to be working with the partners we are and from a methodology standpoint and a MRV standpoint. So again, Cowboy Clean Fuels, we're a company, we've been around 5 years, technology developed at the University of Wyoming, based on research going back almost 20 years. And as I mentioned, so, we produce renewable natural gas at the same time we, sequester carbon that's been removed from the atmosphere. So it's completely unique in this space, really completely unique in both spaces, and the ability to do both of those things, which is why we really knew, early on that there was no methodology out there that was going to cover us, right? We're in the bikers category, and that's why we've kind of given our methodology a name, Bikers plus RNG. But we're different than every other bikers technology. So again, critical that we worked with an expert like Eco to make sure the methodology was developed properly, but also critical to work with a group like Mangrove to make sure that the MRV, digital MRV, it fits perfectly to this unique situation. Just a little bit more. So a couple things, obviously, what makes us really unique. The first thing I mentioned, the fact that we're doing both of these things at the exact same time, producing RNG and sequestering and removing carbon dioxide. The second thing that's novel is that this happens below ground, right? So this is 1,000 feet below the ground in geologic formation, that happens to be a porous, fractured, and highly absorptive coal geologic formation. We start with biomass, renewable, organic, terrestrial, based feedstock that we solubilize, and we inject it through existing infrastructure into the subsurface, where there's, in the place we are, in the Powder River Basin in Northeast Wyoming, there's native microorganisms that live in this geologic formation that are methanogenic, and they break down that organic matter and they produce methane and CO2, just like they would anywhere else. The beauty of being in this geologic formation is that it has properties that make it absorb the CO2. So the CO2, once produced down there by the microbes, immediately gets adsorbed onto the surface of the geologic formation, essentially is permanently removed. Not the story for the methane. The methane is free to move, and it transports, it gets transported through the subsurface to other wells that we then produce it to surface by pumping it, and now we bring that to market as renewable natural gas. So again, completely novel, completely unique to the world. We had to have a new methodology, to be to bring this to market, and we had to obviously come up with a very uniquely purpose designed MRV to make it work as well.
David, can you talk a little bit more about the methodology development process? How you looked at what else was already out there in the space, how we decided to come up with something new. How did that process go?
Yeah, to start with, we really like and trust Ryan and his team, but we have to confirm that reality supports the claims, right? The auditor and me won't let that go away. So we started with a fundamental scrub of the science to confirm that what he's saying is true, that the processes occur, that the archaea in these formations are actually active in the manner that he states they are, and from there we comb the market. So we look across historical methodologies going back through the CDM, the Kyoto era protocol era of development, the early carbon market days. We looked at all the protocols that have existed for any kind of adjacent process in carbon capture and CCS, as well as in existing carbon markets. And we found, lo and behold, that there's nothing quite like it out there. So we got to partner with them. We spent quite a few months on the process of development. We started with more thought process and conceptual development phases and protocols and white papers, and ultimately have culminated in this this BIKERS, so biomass, carbon removal, and storage for another acronym, plus RNG, renewable natural gas, to complete the suite. So we were able to work through what was out there and what is new, and formatted into a new ISO 14064 Part 2 compatible greenhouse gas crediting methodology. So within that, we have the quantification guidelines and the rule sets that are required to make legitimate claims and to make sure the market stands up strong. Is our main function in this whole industry at ECO, is to make sure that the claims will support an ongoing marketplace. But in this particular instance, to make sure that Ryan and his team are on the right side of this market progression, which they certainly are. We've worked with them long enough to recognize the value that is coming from this production of this particular type of carbon removal activity. So yeah, culminating with what has been and what is new and needed to be crafted from scratch, such as some of the boundary and additionality questions, and like everything in this space, life cycle assessment came in very critically, and so put all that together into the BIKERS plus RNG methodology that was released recently.
So before we kick it over to Mingy to talk more about Mangrove Systems, David, I want to define two things. You mentioned ISO 14064-2. Can we talk first about what ISO is, what role it plays, and how it relates to the methodology that we developed?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody's probably familiar on this, or many people might be, that there's carbon crediting registries out there. So mentioned some carbon removal focused ones, Puro Earth, Isometric, we've got Gold Standard and Vera and ACR, Climate Action Reserve, and many others. They establish standards and in some instances create methodologies that can be followed. In this case, there wasn't a methodology that's pre-baked into a market or into a registry. So following the ISO procedures, the International Standards Organization procedures for high quality crediting, it's the same listing of rules that has underlined all of the crediting methodologies out there to date. So we follow the highest industry standards and make sure that they're aligned with throughout the process.
Okay, one other thing I want to define. You mentioned the life cycle assessment, or an LCA, another fun acronym. What role does the LCA play in this process?
It corroborates the entire claim of a carbon removal or carbon negativity or any kind of avoidance activity, because without proper boundary setting around what is included in the emissions and in the removals for a project, the claims are speculative or potentially fraudulent, incorrect. So the life cycle assessment does that first, establish the proper boundaries. We make sure that they are quite conservative and going slightly farther back than the project developer ever wants us to, but we always bring in the right amount of information to align with both the ISO standards and to make sure that we are conservatively accounting for all the emissions within their boundary, within the operations, within the extraction of the renewable natural gas, and make sure that the net balance of inputs and outputs are materially accurate within.
So it's a modeling exercise.
That's correct. Corroborated by Mingyi and team, proving out that all the inputs and outputs are as stated.
All right, Mingyi, let's jump to you. I want to hear more about Mangrove Systems and what stage you guys are actually brought into this process.
Sure. I'll start with a brief introduction, just talk about who we are. So at Mangrove, our mission really is to help project developers such as Cowboy Clean Fuel to take their what we call molecules to market. So we do so by providing an MRV operation platform that tracks every molecule that flows through the project. So we kind of nickname ourselves to be like the quick book of carbon accounting, if you will. So really our job is to work with developers to operationalize their project so then it can run efficiently, accurately, and most importantly, making sure that developers can get the credits originated on time to ensure project commercial viability. So we there are three key steps in the process. So step number one is measure, which means it's data collection. So we track data from across all the project operations. So some examples could be feedstock logistics or transportation emissions, gas production at the end, or any lab sampling in between. The analogy of this would be the financial transactions in your financial accounting books. So we are tracking all of the ins and out of carbon in this case to make sure we have all the right data to perform accounting. And one of the key learnings from this process is that we develop a standard operating procedures of the data collection process. And over time, we're working with developers to automate this data collection as much as possible to both improve efficiency, but also improve credibility of data to minimize human intervention. The second step is to quantify, and this is where the accounting happens. This is where the lifecycle assessment model sits. So essentially, it's a series of measurement models, which are just a fancier version or word for calculations that quantifies the number of credits or according to the specific standards and methodology the project developer chooses to adhere to. And in Cowboy's unique case, it also quantifies the carbon intensity of the renewable natural gas. So this is a multi-ledgered model. And where digital MRV really provides value is to be able to quantify both of those numbers at the same time, because there's a lot of sophistication in the allocation, both for the revenue and cost, right? So allocation of sequestration between the two value streams, but also the allocation of emissions, which are the cost in this case, across the two value streams. And calculations can get quite unwieldy if we don't have a streamlined process of importing and exporting this data. And lastly is reporting. So I guess thinking about the financial reporting of your income statement, of your any kind of documents you have to put together for your financial statements. In this case, we're packaging all your data for your carbon accounting for a VVB to review. And this is where the detailed calculations live. This is where evidence also live. And in the MRV world, evidence is really what provides more credibility to the data that you're providing. So it could be in the form of pictures, videos, geospatial data. So anything you really need to give a third dimension to your data. And so we put together package in a way that accelerates the ongoing verification at a much higher frequency than a traditional paper-based MRV process. And really the goal is to help shorten the cash conversion cycle of the project developers.
So, Mingy, how do you decide on operating parameters, and how do you actually ingest that data into your system?
Yeah. So when we take when we look at the methodologies or look at the standards that kind of dictates how the calculations is done, we not only look at the parameters on paper, but we also kind of try to pick out what is essentially measured in the field. So for example, to calculate emissions from diesel. So typically you have two parameters in this calculation. You've got gallons of diesel times emission factors. So tons of CO2 to TCO2e per gallon. But in Cowboy's case, we don't really measure gallon directly in the field. We measure number of hours operation of a particular steam unit, and we time that by the number of gallons per hour, right? So in this case, we extract from the theory and look at what are the actual operating parameters in the field, and we comb through the entire list of data we have to acquire to determine that.
So I'm curious, like, how were these applied in Cowboy's case? Maybe Ryan, this is a question for you. I mean, how were these elements kind of pushed into Mangrove System, and how did you work through those challenges from an MRV perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're still doing it. It's in process. We're far along, but it's in process. It's been a collaborative effort. But yeah, that's it's a matter of identifying where those sources of data are, what the form is, right, and then what the best way to get them in the system. And quite frankly, we really had to leverage Mangrove's experience on doing this with a bunch of other methodologies and project types to make sure we're doing it the best way. But it's a matter of just identifying the sources of all those the data, the where it's coming from, and how we need to get it in to make sure that it's smooth and efficient.
Yeah, so maybe to add on to that, one of the key piece of artifact that we co-developed at the beginning of the project, what we call it a data dictionary. So essentially is an exhaustive list of parameters that we will need to cover at a minimum for registry purposes, but that's a floor. The ceiling would be for any additional parameters that buyers or off-takers will need to require. So that data dictionary essentially captures all of the data along the value chain, and we determine what is the data frequency, what is the unit, what is the level of granularity, and then as we turn it into standard operating procedures, we also talk about owners who's capturing those data and how each data is injected, like what is a measuring instrument, and how that gets integrated into Mangrove. So that becomes a blueprint of as a starting point for us to stitch everything together on the ground.
It's really that's really where it all becomes real and critical, because a lot of this stuff comes from we mentioned the LCA and Dave did a good job describing what that is, and you always start with that, and it's easy to kind of build a spreadsheet out that has cells that you can put data in, right, that you can do a calculation from. It's another thing entirely to be able to take all that, when it's happening real, in the field, and there's data being produced, and figure out a way to get it into a system in an efficient way, right? That's really the magic of Mangrove system.
Yeah, maybe, sorry, Steve, I think you're probably curious about what's an example of what that means. And Ryan and us, we have been in the weeds of trying to make simple multiplication happen in real life. Example of this would be for us to calculate gas production or biogenic gas production data, there's 3 simple parameters, A times B times C, but they come at different frequencies. One of the parameters is coming at a daily basis at multiple locations, and we have to aggregate that. And then another parameter is coming from a lab sample that gets taken at a relatively irregular basis every couple of weeks. And there is a lag in which we obtain that data in a later date. So really the A times B times C becomes arrays of data we have to sum its product together. So we really had to work with the team to identify what's the right parameters and what's the right frequency, and then who is in charge of filling this data over time when the lab sample becomes available. So that's just an example of the intricacy of operation.
Yeah. I just want to pause and compliment Mangrove on impressive alliteration throughout the process. We've got the quick book of carbon accounting, we've got molecules to market, and we've also got a data dictionary, which just helps me remember all of these important elements of the product. So thank you for that. I think the big takeaway for me here is that this is not an easy process. It's complicated, especially if we're dealing with a novel methodology. It can be ambiguous throughout the process. And requires really deep subject matter expertise. And so I want to talk about some of the challenges that we've experienced along the way. And maybe, Ryan, I'll start with you on some of the methodological elements that we dealt with early on in the process.
Yeah. You don't really know what you're getting into until you start to do it, right? And, as Dave alluded to earlier, there's a lot of checking to make sure, kind of, verifying, that what we're saying actually, is real, and then fitting in that into a methodology that could be followed was really, a key challenge early on. Again, we've been deep in this for almost 2 decades, right? And some things you just kind of take for granted, and you have to step back and realize that no, other people aren't going to take that for granted. We actually have to, think critically about how we're going to, demonstrate that and describe it very clearly in a methodology that someone can follow. So that was huge, but a huge step for us, really, in being kind of pushed and guided by Eco in doing that to make sure that it was very clear, to the world. When we finally finished and published the methodology, I think we came up with something really great, in that regard. And then we moved to the MRV, and it's things we've already talked about, a little bit, but it's the same thing. We have a very novel, process, and novel technology. It doesn't fit into other boxes, and so we had to be able to be, really flexible, and have a system that was customizable, and that was, configurable enough, to allow for these things, like Mingyi was saying, with our different data streams coming in different, from different sources at different frequencies. All this is just really, really critical. And, so if anybody's, got a novel idea for a process technology and, thinking about, doing something like this, these are the challenges that we faced, right? How do you translate what you've been doing from a technology standpoint into a methodology that's easy, for the world to kind of, understand and appreciate? And then how do you translate that into, a system that can be used, not only by us, but by, customers, to make sure that, they can trust the data, they can trust what they're paying, for what they're buying, right? And then, verify it after the fact as well. So those are the key challenges, translating that, into these products, that face the customers and allow the customers to have confidence in us.
David, do you want to add anything on the methodology development process early on, in that stage?
Yeah, I think challenges for us, and I don't think it was necessarily unique to Cowboy Clean Fuels, but is the I guess the preconceptions that the market bakes into all of the developers out here about what is and isn't acceptable, about how expansive the crediting opportunities are. And I think we have to break hearts a lot, and I don't like to do that, but we just, with the LCA boundaries, how they are, and just how tightly that you have to trace every single molecule on its way to market, to steal Mingyi's terms, is it's really a process that we have to go through every time. And I think because of how cautious and conservative the Cowboy team is, it wasn't an issue to explain that. But when there's extra deductions and stuff, that's always a conversation of like tracing the feedstock and the counterfactuals and the proof that goes into that. It's always 3 steps deeper than we even anticipate going into it. So I'd say that's the challenges are universal with biomass feedstock, in particular, that it's complicated, and you want to make sure that it's done right, and that you're not adding in extra points where they're not due. So I think we found a good balance there. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we found a pretty good balance that accounts for all the components of this process.
Conservativeness really is such an important part of the project development philosophy, right? And I think it's rightfully so. I mean, if buyers are going to be spending money on these environmental outcomes, we want to know that they're true. And there are also hole pokers out there that are putting a target on the back of everyone going out there and trying to innovate in this space. And if you don't do things in the right way from the beginning, then again, you're exposing yourself to risk, your project to risk, and all of the buyers that are participating in the process as well. So yeah, that's where the conservativeness piece comes in. Let's talk a little bit about the challenge of operationalizing the methodology, right? So once we've got this methodology down on paper, how do we think about finding a partner who can actually take that and turn it into traction, into a real project?
Yeah. So I think we've shared a few examples, and this will likely be a summary of what those examples represent. So really, we've identified 2 key challenges in the process operationalizing the methodology. So number 1 is identifying the most relevant operational data for measurement. And number 2 is trying to lower the effort required to quantify the 2 value streams, because there's a lot of sophistication in that calculation. Going back to number 1, we talked about examples of what parameters we should bring in for fuel usage. How do we actually take data and organize it in a way that is meaningful for gas production? And the solution to that was actually quite simple. It was a standard operating procedure. So essentially, it's a document that Cowboy and Mangrove co-created to standardize the data collection process, which specifies what parameters we're taking at what frequency, what is the level of granularity that we're taking. Is it daily? Is it weekly? And then how often are we uploading it or updating it in a way that's manageable for the team? And who's the owner of the parameter? And I think what's key here is that it is a living document where the procedures should change or evolve as Cowboy continues to refine and perfect its processes over time. And it should become a kind of simpler over time, and it should also become just an artifact that we can bring to also our not just verifiers, but also off-takers to improve the credibility of our operations. The second challenge is regarding sophistication of quantification. I think as we inherited an LCA model in Excel form, and I see that as, I guess maybe I love analogies. I see that as like one surface of a Rubik's Cube, and our platform really is a time series. So then it could be a 5x5 Rubik's Cube. So it becomes very complex. And for us, it's really, as we were QCing our model, I personally have taken the manual approach of calculating the two work streams, and it was extremely painful. So I think it was a very like customer centric approach for us to not just testify the quality of our work, but also just to have empathies towards what would project developer do without a digital tool. So I think it was a valuable exercise for us to both validate the quality, but also just get an idea of if we can streamline this to be a 3D model, then have essentially a time series LCA, then the developer can spend much their valuable time on continue to refine the technology and not having to worry about the administrative part of the process. Even though it's an admin process, it is where technology gets converted to money. So it's still extremely important.
We've got the quantification cube. It's another alliteration we can pitch out to your marketing team. So we're going to take some questions from the audience, but before we do that, I want to talk about maybe some final lessons learned.
Yeah.
So maybe Ryan, I'll kick to you first here.
Yeah, so many lessons, but I'll just hit a few. I think I think the first thing I would advise anybody in our position, pick your partners wisely. We picked great partners and can vouch for these folks with first-hand experience. But it's really critical because you can't do it all yourself. And if you think, even though you think you might know everything about your process, your technology, what would go into methodology, I can guarantee that you don't. And experts are really important. And go into that process with a very open mind. I think David mentioned sometimes they have to break some hearts. I think you have to be willing to have your heart broken a little bit. You have to come into this open and humble, knowing that you may not have everything kind of figured out, but if you've got good committed partners, you kind of work through the challenges, whether that's, whether something gets counted or doesn't get counted, or whether it's about, a particular approach you're going to take to gather the data, or even just the form of output, right? You need, be willing to work collaboratively. But those are the lessons we learned, luckily not too much the hard way. Everything takes a little longer than you hope it will. Got to be ready for that as well. But if you do pick wisely your partners and you do come in with an open mind and very humble about your approach, I think the outcome can be really good. And that's kind of where we are.
David, anything to add from your end?
Yeah, I think that it's key. The partnership thing is really interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that exact way, Ryan. But for us too, it's like picking the clients who are willing to go the extra mile to prove the efficacy of their approach, and egos have to be left at the door in this market. I think exuberance should drive all of us towards doing the climate actions that we're kind of wake us up every day to perform. But at the end of the day, that exuberance gets you to the point where you are pushing these efforts to the degree that they can be verified and justified. So I think that's a really good point. The other one is to definitely. I talked early on about building upon the methodologies that were out there before, and I think that's an important component too, because there's a lot of learnings that have been iterated for the last 30 years in these crediting methodologies, and for better and for worse, some have done better than others, and some have held up against through the span of time. But I think that is one thing, because in essence, this is a geologic storage methodology, and geologic storage tied with terrestrial biomass. So there's two avenues that we were able to kind of cement together in this way. And I think that if we had just started from scratch, we would have missed a lot of valuable information that's been out there. So I'll definitely second Ryan on his partnership piece, and then add on, just make sure that you're kind of contributing to the growth in the market. Every one of these projects that comes forward should advance the whole market.
We're building on the shoulders of giants. Mingy, how about you?
Yeah, so I guess I'll wrap that up with the philosophies that our team always adhere to, is people plus process plus software really equals to a successful implementation. I think as a so-called software company, like most of our teams grew up in a software-centric world, but in the role of implementation, it really is a combination of three that really leads to great results. So people pick great partners, but also ensure that your team understands how their domain contributes to the whole MRV process, and how their contribution is ultimately leading to the environmental attributes becoming mainstream revenue of your project. The process piece is, I think I've mentioned multiple times, SOP, and it really is a way for us to streamline and minimize workload, and improve credibility of our processes. The software is just a cherry on top. It's a platform that really ties everything together, reduce a lot of the human interventions and human errors and human labor. So I think the right combination of all three will really ensure that system enhances efficiency, and not just become another operational layer to the operational burden to the system.
Great. I think we're at the Q&A part of this webinar. Why don't we kick it to the audience to ask some questions?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Q&A portion of the webinar. I hope you enjoyed the presentation thus far. We have a number of questions coming in, so I will hand it off over to Steve, who's going to kind of moderate that.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for these great questions, everybody. Keep them coming. We're going to start out with a question from Tong Lee. This is a question from Mangrove. How did you decide emissions factors for each material? What database did you use?
Sure. It's a quick one. So we have subscription to the more common databases, and then normally, as you would know, that these emission factors really differ by region. So we need to decide on where is the materials sourced from, or where does the transport emission coming from. So we'll make sure that's customized to the location. And then oftentimes our project developer also bring their own LCAs, so they also sometimes customize it for their own situation.
All right, here's a question from Brian. This is for you, Ryan. All right, so Cowboy Clean Fuels has patents, the methodology, off-takers. What are the challenges that Cowboy Clean Fuels is presently working through? Scaling, replication, RNG transport, what else?
Yeah, scaling is certainly one right now. As we kind of launched our operational phase last year, we build out a little bit differently than maybe a typical RNG or even a carbon removal project, in that we build out modularly. So we'll scale up over the next 3 years or so, and just kind of add on to where we've been. So that's what we're doing right now. The biggest thing is really just kind of building off of the starting point that we've had, and getting up to our full scale projections here over the next few years.
right, here's a question for you, Mingyi. This is from Sagar. Does Mangrove take on instrumentation, data cleaning, or monitoring for errors, or does that fall on the project developer?
Yes, we definitely do. So we have anomaly detection capabilities within the platform. So basically, based on historical data ranges, we will essentially flag to the project developer that certain new data may be falling out of a certain range. But of course, the operations team on the ground are always there to monitor any anomalies on the physical project facilities. So I would say it's definitely a shared responsibilities, but between the two teams, we should have it covered.
Okay, here's a question from Miguel. And this is a question for you, Mingyi. So does Mangrove utilize blockchain technology as a ledger to serialize the emissions reductions and removals, or is this something that the registry of the greenhouse gas project will do? Do these two companies communicate to avoid double counting of emissions? How does this work?
Yeah, so typically as a project, you are only allowed to be certified against one protocol in one registry. So that in itself, pre-operations would be a one mechanism to avoid double counting. And then afterward, we will then have direct integration with the registries. So right now, blockchain is not used. I would argue it's probably going to add to your LCA a lot more. So in a way that there are much simpler mechanism in place to avoid double counting.
It is a hot topic, though. I mean, the question really with blockchain is how you can confirm efficacy of what gets entered on the blockchain. Can be a useful tool, but to your point, there is an emissions impact there. Okay, here's a question from Allison. This is for you, Ryan. What role do you see renewable methane playing in the broader energy transition, particularly compared to other energy sources, clean energy sources like hydrogen or solar?
Yeah, well, we're obviously very bullish about it. We think there's an important role to play. I mean, I think we're all, here focused on the role that the carbon removal is going to need to play relative to, dealing with climate. But it's going to be a long time before our technology or any others are really built out at enough scale to make a real impact. Which doesn't mean we shouldn't all, keep working really, really hard, which we are. But we have to attack this on multiple fronts, and that means the energy transition in terms of what fuels and energy technologies we're using, to get to a point where we've got a stable and sustainable system. Our view is that natural gas, is an important fuel in that transition, and that as challenged as it is, there are ways to make it less impactful. And renewable natural gas is the obvious one. So we think it has a very important role to play, along with solar and wind. Hydrogen, we'll see. It really hasn't done much to date, but we think renewable natural gas is got a really important role to play, and probably for decades to come.
David, do you want to weigh in this as well?
Yeah, I think renewable natural gas is kind of the underdog coming into the scene. Steve and I have recently spoken with prominent carbon removal companies about incorporation of renewable natural gas into energy systems and into carbon crediting in general. And I think it's an unknown frontier as far as how the accounting is going to work out precisely, but it's important for decarbonization of industry, and it's also going to play an important role of within carbon the carbon removal sector as well, with Cowboy Clean Fuels, as well as with the adjacency to a lot of other project types that are energy intensive. So I think it's an important topic, and Eco is definitely at the forefront of RNG accounting across the board, and particularly with how it intersects with the removal space.
All right, here's a question from Steve, and maybe Mingyi, you want to take a first stab at this, and then we can kick it around to Ryan and David as well. How do you anticipate artificial intelligence being used in dMRV? Obviously, the elephant in the room with everything that we're dealing with right now, and particularly in this space, there's huge opportunities. What do you guys think?
Of course. I mean, MRV is essentially data is the liquid gold And data is the product, and data is the source of revenue. So there's many different ways. I think we need to be smart about what is the most valuable contribution of the technology. So on the more simpler end, because one of the biggest pain point is in data collection and just streamlining all of the data into useful format. So maybe even beyond an AI, they're just general like tech-enabled tools out there. So from data collection standpoint, there are Internet of Things, there are remote sensing, so richer medium to prove the credibility of your credits. And second is in terms of data transformation. So taking something that's unstructured and messy and using large language models to then transform it into something that's useful. And I think I've mentioned anomaly detection, but also on the back end, the platform will be then filled with a lot of rich data. So it will also be an opportunity for us to use AI to read what is the data coming in from your projects and generate additional insights or report when we feed into the registry reporting and for buyers. Those are something to start.
Yeah. Brian, any thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I agree. And I think even adding on to that, the QA, QC, on the back end, right? So, looking at that data that's coming in, looking at the data that's coming out, looking for trends to see any anomalies, that maybe not, apparent to, the human observer, I think can be a really, helpful tool, especially as we start to get a lot of data, a lot of projects, a lot of data. It's going to be a tool that could potentially help, just increase the reliability and the trust associated with these systems.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I honestly zoned out for a second. Come back to me.
So this was the AI question. We can come back to it.
So AI question. So AI is going to be essential in every one of our workflows for computation, for digitalization, for verification. It's coming into the sector very hot and heavy and fast. I know that coding is incorporating AI rapidly. I know that it's enhancing workflows, and it's very much a pressing component of all these projects. And I can't imagine it doing anything but adding some value and integrity, as well as speeding up the how fast these projects can come to market.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, one thing that is important, however, is that these processes will not be entirely replaced by AI. Subject matter expertise is still critical to provide oversight and ensure that what is being generated through these tools is accurate. And, unfortunately, that we have seen hallucinations in the past, and that will continue. So, the value of a human with a discerning eye is going to remain critical here, I think, even if, we're able to replace, growing percentages of what used to be manual workflows. Here is a question for David from Susan. What is your current view on the carbon offtake market? And do you feel this foundational work with Mangrove positions Cowboy ahead of other players?
I think that every carbon developer needs some kind of an edge, especially in a market with somewhat limited number of buyers that are currently in it. So, excuse me, being able to differentiate yourself, especially in a manner that's going to add such a hefty degree of quality and certainty in the final declaration of number of credits, and how just traceable and transparent the project is from start to finish, that is only going to support the market overall, but Cowboy Clean Fuels positioning within this market. I think that on all the projects we've been fortunate to work with Mangrove on, it's been a key differentiator for the developer to be able to have Eco's keen expertise on the market's characteristics and the developmental questions and strategy, and then being able to tie that in with the digitalization and the clear-cut definition of all of the project documentation, all of the flows of data, all of the information, all of the credits from start to finish. I feel like it's a solid package, and it's going to be replicated time and again with this team here, as well as throughout the market. I think it's kind of precedent setting to have this type of an integration in this industry. So it's I think it's going to help you out, Susan.
Yeah. And I mean, Brian, maybe I'll kick it to you here as well. I mean, what's the experience been so far, kind of bringing these credits to market, conversations with buyers? What's the state?
Yeah, well, I mean, anybody who's been in our shoes, a developer, knows the level of diligence that you get put through really every step of the way. From the beginning, as we talked about earlier, when we started the methodology work, with Dave and his team, there's nothing that's taken for granted. When someone's looking at what you're doing from the outside, especially for the first time, especially when it's novel. And so you kind of go through that, and that has continued with the offtake discussions we've had. The benefit we've had of these partners that we have here is come through in all those responses that we've, the back and forth that we've had with the offtakers that we're talking to, because we're ready for those questions, and we've got data to back up the answers that we provide. Our ultimately at the end of the day, our response is, you're going to be able to audit this. You're going to be able to look at this yourself. You're going to be able to reliably, depend on, not just what I'm telling you today, but the data that you're going to see at the end of the game. So it's just huge for us to be able to bring all this package together, as David said, to the market in our discussions with offtakers.
Mingy, do you want to comment at all just on Mangrove's role here and how you support the partners that you work with from a commercialization perspective or carbon offtake?
Yeah, for sure. So we often come in even before the funding run is closed, because as developers will go through due diligence, the buyers wanted to see what is the data tracking process that you will have in place. So that journey, we kind of go through that journey with the customers, and then on an ongoing basis as a platform, we, as I mentioned earlier, that we collect data not just for the minimal data required to get credits, but then we also will collect additional data points that is tailored to what your buyer is looking for. So in that sense, that we are able to support just adding more richness and to the credibility that you are offering to off-takers.
Okay, we have another question here from Miguel. He's wondering about scalability. What are the bottlenecks that Cowboy Clean Fuels has observed to scale CO2 removal and greenhouse gas reductions? Is it the unique properties of geological storage that has this particular bacteria, or the availability of feedstock? Do you guys have also, he's wondering if you have multiple project sites?
Yeah, scale is I think is our biggest opportunity, and perhaps in the long run, what's going to differentiate us the most. The geologic formations that we're working with, they are limited in terms of they don't exist everywhere underlying your feet wherever you might be, but where they do exist, the resource is vast. So we're in the Powder River Basin in Northeast Wyoming. Just a quick data point, our first project covers the land area covers about 12,000 acres, but the opportunity for us to expand is literally 1,000 times that. It's 15 million acres that under which this geologic formation that has the microbes that do the work for us exist. And it's not just the Powder River Basin is not the only place. The San Juan Basin, in the Southwest, and there's places all around the world. We're getting inquiries from folks in Asia, in Europe, et cetera, about project opportunities that we can hopefully move forward on. So we do have a pipeline. We're right now, we're really focused on our first project to make sure we get this one right, because it'll be the blueprint for everything we do. But there's definitely a pipeline coming, and hopefully in a few years we'll be one of the biggest players in the market, and for both these markets, both RNG and carbon removal. But stick with us and see.
All right, thanks, Ryan. We are just about at the top of the hour here, so I think we're going to wrap things up. Thank you so much to Mingy, Ryan, and David, and I'm going to kick it back to Lindsay to close this out.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This has been a really awesome experience. I know I learned a lot. I hope our audience members did too. For those of you that follow EcoEngineers, we have a ton of webinars coming up in June. So stay tuned on our email list or go to our website to find out which ones are coming. I wanted to thank all of my presenters here today, and look looking forward to talking with you soon.